I've done over 200 transactional lending deals and over $500,000 in revenue in the past 12 months, and I have a community of over 3,500 people that I teach every single principle and strategy that I've utilized in that time to get into and get their first dollar in real estate through transactional lending. And in this video, I'm going to be breaking down to you every term I could think of that has to do with transactional lending so that you have an understanding of what people are talking about when they are talking about it. Because if you do not know what people are saying, it is incredibly difficult to get deals. And I think this will be the unlock a lot of you guys need to actually have confident conversations and go start crushing some deals. So this is your transactional lending glossary. The first term that we're going to break down is, of course, transactional lending. Now, transactional lending is lending short-term capital specifically for real estate transactions. There is so many mistakes and confusions when it comes to the term transactional lending, but it's right there in the name. Transactions can be as little as an hour, right? As little as 30 minutes. It can be as long as 30 days. That's transactional, right? It's within a real estate transaction. And the better way that you can quantify transactional lending is that it's within the real estate transaction, right? So we'll talk about later in here escrow versus outside of escrow, right? If a deal is at a title company, then it is transactional. The money is in escrow, right? If a deal closes and your money is still in the deal, then it is no longer transactional. So that's the difference. One of them, your money is staying in escrow. One of them, the money goes outside and becomes more of an asset-based thing, something that requires liens and all that good stuff. Transactional lending is your short-term stuff. Now let me break down the three methods of transactional lending that I've used for you. The first term we're going to break down is earnest money deposit. This is oftentimes referred to as EMD. An earnest money deposit is the upfront money that a buyer pays to show serious intent to purchase a property. It validifies a contract and is typically about 1% of the purchase price on a contract. So when somebody goes under contract in real estate, they're going to put down an earnest money deposit. That is going to be put down, it's going to be given to the title company, and they are going to take that money and hold on to it to validify that contract. The next term is double closing. Double closing is a type of transaction where two back-to-back transactions take place, often on the same day, involving two separate contracts. That's the important part here. Two separate contracts. So a double closing involves two separate contracts. It means that one party is buying a property and then immediately reselling it to another property. Now, again, people try to misuse this term and say, I'm doing a double closing. One closes this day and then one closes 2 weeks from now. That is not a double closing. The only discrepancy in double closing is that some states do have requirements that a double closing takes place on 2 separate days or maybe 1 to 2 days apart based on that state's laws for buying a property and then reselling that same property again. But in most places, you can buy it and immediately resell it, and that is what a double closing is. Next up is the Morby method. This is a transaction where the seller does seller financing on part of the deal after closing. It can be tricky and it requires the right knowledgeable lender. So a Morby method, what happens is that you're going to come in with debt to buy a property. Let's say you get a DSCR loan, it's at 70% loan to value, and you get that debt to go buy a property. That leaves this 30% bubble that you would have to bring as a down payment. On a Morby method, what happens is the seller is willing to seller finance you that additional 30% or maybe even more, but they can't seller finance that to you before the transaction closes. Why? Because then they're not actually selling the whole property to you. So what has to happen in order to satisfy the needs of the loan is that you have to buy the property, and then after you've bought the property, the seller can then seller finance you that portion of the equity, that down payment. So that is what a Morby method is. The way that you would get into it in transactional lending, in case you were curious, is that a transactional lender would bring those transactional funds to cover the down payment, and then right when the transaction ends, the seller finance note covers that. You get your money back plus some profit. The next term is gap lending. Gap lending is providing the funds to literally bridge the gap between a certain time when other funds will be needed. They're often used by fix and flippers, and when we talk about gap, you're looking at a gap in a transaction. So let's say, for example, these are some ways that I have seen it used. Somebody has applied for a loan, and they're gonna be getting the funds from the loan at the end of next week, right? But they need money by this week to close on the deal, to satisfy some sort of a requirement, whatever it may be. So they need funds to fill that gap, right? They need funds now to get to the gap between now and when it ends, and that is where gap lending comes in. Another example with fix and flippers would be that they go get a hard money loan. That hard money loan covers 80% of their purchase price, and then there's that gap between what they're getting on the loan and how much they need to actually close things out. And so a gap lender would come in and say, hey, we'll lend you that money. Maybe they'll also lend the cost for construction and things like that, and that's where a gap lender would come in. Next up is private money lending, or PML, as a lot of you guys have probably heard it. And this is any loan that's not being done through a licensed lender, okay? They're typically done from one individual to another. And private money lending is, again, incredibly vague. So technically speaking, anything that we're talking about with transactional lending can be considered private money lending. It's person to person, except private money lending is usually protected by some sort of a lien, deed, that kind of thing. Whereas in transactional, obviously it stays within the transaction. So private money lending is an incredibly vague term. You could lend 50 bucks to your mom, and that can be private money lending. You can lend a down payment on a rental property. You can lend a loan for somebody to make payroll for their business. These are all different forms of private money loans. The typical structure for a private money loan is that you would lend money, you would have a contract, an agreement with some sort of protection or collateral backing it, and then you'll get paid either monthly or yearly, or potentially even get some sort of equity in the property. So that's how a private money loan works. The next term is hard money lending, or HML, as some of you may have heard it called. And this is loans that are used specifically by fix and flippers. They're typically 12 months or less, and they are backed by an asset. That is what hard money lending is. So when you go to buy a property as a fix and flipper, you need somebody to bring the funds to buy the property until you fix it up and then flip it and sell it on the market. That is what hard money lending does. It is a short-term loan. It is not a long-term thing. It's, hey, you're gonna take this money, you're gonna go do what you said you're gonna do with it, and then you're gonna bring it back. They are going to underwrite your deal. They're gonna make sure everything looks good. They're gonna be in first position on the property, meaning that if they needed to foreclose, they can get that property from you, and then they are going to make you that loan. Now, typical structure for a hard money loan is going to be that there's going to be a percentage that you owe them each month, and then they're also going to charge upfront. So say you did a $500,000 hard money loan, they're likely going to charge you at least 1 to 2 points upfront, which means $10,000 to get access to the loan, and then you're going to pay them monthly interest payments and then pay them everything back at the end of whatever your term was, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, something like that. The next term is proof of funds, or a POF, as people call it. And this is documentation or evidence showing that a lender, you in this case, has sufficient capital to complete a transaction. Now, this is a term that is oftentimes completely confused, but it's actually just so obvious. A POF is proof of funds, right? So if I told you right now that I had $100,000 in my bank account and you said, can you send me a POF? I would say, sure. And I could go to my bank account and I could download my bank statement and it says Chase Bank $100,000, and you say, cool, that is proof of the funds that you said you had. Now, the way that a lot of people like to misuse proof of funds in real estate is by doing what's called lying. They'll try and get somebody to either create them for them, or they will fake a proof of funds saying that they have money that they don't actually have in order to get approved or whatever it may be for a transaction, when this, of course, is not truthful at all. So the proper use of a proof of funds is simply proving that you have funds that you actually have. How would this be used? Well, if you said, Ryan, I need you to do a $500,000 double close for me, can you send them a proof of funds that you have that $500,000? I would say yes. And then I would send them that proof of funds. They would say, cool, we now know that Ryan is not some random idiot that's trying to make money off of lending. He's actually going to fulfill his requirements for this deal to get things closed out, and we're good to go. On the other hand, if you are trying to buy a $500,000 house and you want proof of funds for $500,000 from me, and I say, well, I'm not giving you $500,000 for this property. You just asked me for the EMD, which is $5,000. And they say, yeah, but we need proof of funds. Well, my funds aren't helping you, because proving that I have $500,000 is not going to do anything for your deal when I'm not the one that's going to be buying this property for you. That's where people get confused / try to stretch the truth a little bit. The reality is a proof of funds is exactly what it sounds like. It's just proving that you have money. The next one is the inspection period. An inspection period is the time with which a buyer has the right to back out of a contract. Oftentimes, this correlates with the ability to get your EMD deposit back, but that depends on the contract. So when you go under contract in real estate, there is always going to be a section for the inspection period. And this section might state that there isn't an inspection period. It might state that there's one for a couple days, or it might be a month, who knows? But this is the period. Again, this gets misconstrued all the time, but it should be pretty obvious. It's the period with which you can go actually inspect. In investing, it gets confusing, so think about it like your primary residence. If you were to go buy a house, you would want to have time to go check, make sure there isn't mold in the walls, right? And there's no major leaks, and everything you saw in the pictures or that you were told is actually true. You're going to inspect it. And more officially, you're going to pay somebody to go inspect it, right? Alternatively, in investing, sometimes people do that, like maybe on a fix and flip, or if they're buying a turnkey rental. But oftentimes what people are using it for as a wholesaler is just a time where they're protected to go then try and find a buyer. And so in the case of transactional lending, the reason why an inspection period is incredibly important is because if the contract states that that time period is when your money is protected, then that is like your knight in shining armor, right? You need to know when your inspection period starts, when your inspection period ends, and you need to make sure that you are within those boundaries in order to protect yourself. The next term is the due diligence period. And a due diligence period is literally just another term for the inspection period. You may see different terminology on contracts, but when you hear that word, due diligence, or anything relating to the ability to go check and make sure everything is intact, that is an inspection period in its own right. The next term is the effective date of a contract. Now, the effective date of a contract is the date when the last person signs the contract and it becomes official. Okay, so when you're looking at a contract, let's say a buyer and seller sign the contract, and the buyer signs the contract on September 3rd, but the seller signs the contract on September 5th. Well, the effective date of the contract is September 5th. Why? Because if one party has signed it, the contract means nothing, right? A contract doesn't mean anything until everyone has signed. So once everyone has signed, whether it's 2 people, 3 people, or 10 people, once everybody has signed, then the contract officially becomes a binding agreement, right? It becomes a true contract. And then everything else is enacted. So if your inspection period is 10 days from the effective date, you don't know when those 10 days start and end until there is an actual effective date. And so you have to be able to identify that effective date and be clear on what it is. And it's one of the easiest things to do because you literally just look at all the signatures, find out when the last person signed, and that's your effective date. The next term is a refundable deposit. This is any deposit made on a deal that is specifically stated to be refundable if certain conditions are met, such as a failed inspection period or backing out during that inspection period. A refundable deposit is a transactional lender's best friend, and also I would argue a wholesaler's best friend, because it is a deposit with which when you follow the terms given, the terms laid out in a contract, you can get your money back. And so whether that's backing out during the inspection period, finding mold in those walls, or something else going wrong, as long as it's stipulated in the contract and the money is considered to be refundable, then within that time period, you can get your money back, and that's your refundable deposit. Now, the next term is a non-refundable deposit, and that's a deposit that will be not returned no matter what the situation. When this occurs, it is often referred to as money going hard. So those of you guys, if you've ever heard somebody say, is the money going hard? Now let's be clear here since we're defining terms. Hard money is what we talked about earlier, right? A hard money lender. But your money going hard, flip-flop, your money going hard means that you can't get it back, okay? Now to go back to the other term, if they say your money is soft, that means it's there, but you can get it back. If you say your money is hard, it means it's there and you can't get it back. So let's say you go into a deal and you agree that your money is non-refundable. Your EMD, right? Your earnest money deposit is non-refundable. Then that means you can back out of the deal. You have the right to back out of the deal, but you don't have a right to get that money back, okay? So there is stipulations in every contract for these exact things, and you need to make sure that you understand what the terms mean, and then you check on them so that you understand your specific situation. Purchase and sale agreement is the next one. A purchase and sale agreement is often referred to as a PSA. There's a lot of terms in real estate, just like in anything. PSA stands for purchase and sale agreement, and it's the contract that is signed by all parties for the sale of a transaction, right? That is your PSA. Now, a PSA can get a ton of things added to it. Those are called addendums, to add another term to the glossary here. Those are called addendums, and that's something that's being added. So maybe an official contract goes into place, and then you decide to change the inspection period, you would add an addendum to the bottom of your purchase and sale agreement saying, hey, by the way, that thing up there, we changed it, here's what we changed it to, all parties sign. But a purchase and sale agreement in its purest form is the documentation. This is a legally binding contract, a legally binding document for the agreed upon sale of a property. Okay, the next term that we're going to talk about is A-B contract. And this term is going to be used in the sense of double closings. The next couple are going to be specifically on double closing. And so the A-B contract is the term used to refer to the first of two contracts on a double closing. It's just a purchase and sale agreement. So it's just like what we just talked about, but here's the difference. On a double closing, you've got A, which is your seller, B, which is your wholesaler, and then C, which is the end buyer, whoever is actually purchasing the property. That's how they are differentiated in a double closing. And because you guys already know, since we defined it, that a double closing has two contracts, those contracts are going to be broken down by name so that you know what we're referring to. So it's more of a clear understanding of what's being referred to, right? So the A-B contract is the contract between the seller and the wholesaler right here. And when we talk about an A-B contract, which by the way is the contract that's going to determine how much money you need to bring if you are funding a double closing, an A-B contract is how it's referred to. Now the next term that we'll talk about is the B-C contract. And as you probably can imagine, it's just the second contract in a double closing. B is your wholesaler, C is your end buyer. So a B-C contract is the second contract, and A-B contract is the first one. Okay, now the next term that we're going to talk about is a HUD statement, an incredibly important term to break down for you. And a HUD statement is the document used in real estate transactions that itemizes all charges and credits. So if you look at a HUD statement, you will see all of the places money is going. Let's say you're buying a house for $300,000 and $1,000 is going to the title company and $5,000 is going to your realtor and $600 is going to an inspection period and blah, 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 blah. All of that money gets broken down on a HUD statement. It says how much the money is, what the money's for, and who the money is going to. HUD statements are incredibly important to understand and also visualize and see so that you can understand what they actually look like in the real world. And then when you have a transaction going on, you know what you're looking for, okay? Next term is a title company. The title company, as we've referred to multiple times, is the entity in charge of facilitating real estate transactions and holding your funds. Now, in some states, instead of a title company, there's what's called like a closing attorney or something like that, but it's really all the same general concept. So defining a title company is that typically it's a building, although it doesn't have to be, with people that are facilitating your transaction, right? They are going to be your point of contact for the deal. And more specifically, we'll define our next term, which is escrow officer. An escrow officer is the individual at the title company responsible for the transaction. They will be your main point of contact. So if a title company is called 123 Title, then Ryan might work at that title company. He's your escrow officer. He's the one that you're going to ask questions about making sure your money's protected, when the deal's closing, what's going on, what needs to happen. That's your point of contact. Now switching gears a little bit, we're going to talk about some lead generation terms for you to understand, specifically when you're learning and working with me. The first term is what's called the Core Four. Now the Core Four is a term that I have taken from Alex Hormozi, who wrote $100 Million Leads. In $100 Million Leads, they talk about the Core Four, which is the 4 key ways of generating leads, okay? Now let's break down those 4 things. And when we talk about generating leads, I guess I'll define this for you first. The first term that I'll define is leads. What is a lead? A lead is any person you have the ability to contact that could be a potential customer. Okay, so technically anybody can be a lead. In the context of your lending business, it would be somebody who potentially, both now or in the future, could work with you, right? That is a lead. Now, here's your Core 4 that we're going to break down today. The first one is cold leads. Cold leads are prospective clients who have not been previously engaged with or introduced. So somebody that you reach out to on Facebook that you've never met, somebody that you DM on Instagram that you've never met. Those are cold leads, right? Somebody who maybe you found their phone number online or you bought their email off of a list or something. That's a cold lead. You've never spoken with them, but they could potentially be someone to work with. A warm lead, on the other hand, is clients who have shown interest or given you permission to contact them. So anybody whose phone number you have, who you've met at a meetup, maybe it's a mutual friend, maybe you've been connected over a text in the past, maybe you've spoken on a phone call, maybe it's a family member or a friend. These are all examples of warm leads. People often try to over elevate what a warm lead is. A warm lead is just anybody who, when you reach out to them, they're not like, who the heck is this person? Right? That's basically it. And even you can take that a step further. They may not even know who you are, but maybe they've opted into something in the past or something like that. They're still warmed up, right? This is not your first ever touch point. That's a warm lead. Core 4 method number 3 is free content. You're watching it right now, right? It's public content shared to establish expertise and attract clients without direct outreach. The cool thing about content is that the first two methods we talked about are one-to-one, right? You send one text message at a time. You send one DM at a time. You make one phone call at a time. Whereas content, when you create it, can be consumed by 10 people, 100 people, 1,000 people, 100,000 people at the same time, right? So it's reaching a larger audience with a same or similar amount of time. That is your free content, your third method of generating leads, okay? Now, the final method of generating leads in the Core 4 is ads, which I don't really need to define to you as a key term, but just wanted to mention it. The next thing I'm going to define is the Rule of 100. I love talking about the Rule of 100. The Rule of 100 is a framework for quantifying the time and effort invested into your lead generation. And the way it can be broken down is leaving 100 comments on posts, sending 100 DMs, spending 100 minutes creating content, or spending $100 on ads. It's like the Core 4 of the Rule of 100 in a sense, right? Those are the 4 things that you can be doing. Now there's a lot of variations of this, but basically the point is measuring what you are doing so that you can see progress, so that you can continue to build momentum and actually generate leads. So when we talk about the Rule of 100, it's not doing all of those things. It's picking one or combining them to reach that level of 100 minutes on content, 100 outreach, 100 comments, or $100 on ads, and then doing all of those things for 100 days in a row. Now this is a baseline thing, right? You can do a lot more than that and you should be more consistent than that, but it's a starting point that you and I can have, and it's a great one to have. The next term is JV. JV stands for joint venture. And a JV is a partnership with another investor or lender to jointly fund a deal, jointly interact on a deal, jointly be a part of a deal. People get JV all the time. All the time they get that word confused. They're like, do you want a JV? Should we JV? What's a JV? This is me responding to you, answering that exact question. When you sign a JV agreement, it's basically like a Word doc that just says, this is who I am and what I'm doing. This is who they are and what they're doing. I have had so many people reach out to me and say like, do you want a JV out of nowhere? And it's like, what does this even mean? Like, what are you asking? What are you trying to accomplish? So this is me trying to share that with you so that you can be more educated in your conversations. If you're asking somebody that, define it, right? Don't say, do you want a JV? Say, do you want to bring the funds for this deal? Do you want to handle the contracts? Do you want to handle the coordination? Like, what are you actually asking? Define that. They'll understand what you mean, and everything will be way clearer. Next term is LLC. LLC stands for Limited Liability Company, and it's a legal structure for a business to provide liability protection and organize operations. Now, I am not a legal or tax expert, as you guys should know by now, so this is not financial advice or anything like that, but an LLC is one of the most common ways that people get started in their kind of entrepreneurial investing journey, because they cost like $100 to get set up. It creates an entity that isn't you, and even if you're not making money, it's kind of nice to have. You can get, you know, your business cards and your business bank accounts and all of that stuff to kind of get the ball rolling, and that's what an LLC is. Next term is CRM. CRM stands for Customer Relationship Management. You may not know what a CRM is. The CRM that we use inside of FundWise is called DealSync. It has all of my websites, systems, and automations set up. And the whole point of it is that it's a system that manages all of your relationships and tracks all of your deals, right? So you have a deal come in, it holds all the information for that deal. You have a deal get rejected, a deal get funded. You can see it all, you can visualize it, you can move it around, and you can keep track. So a CRM is oftentimes used by people not right when they're getting started, but once they have the ball rolling and there's actually things to organize, right? If you got one deal coming in a week, you can probably organize that on your notepad. But eventually, a CRM can help you house all of those things. Next term is Mutual Release Agreement. This is an agreement that is signed by the buyer and the seller, mutually releasing the earnest money deposit to either the lender or the buyer, depending on the situation, in the event that the transaction doesn't close. So this is basically just verbiage that you can add to a contract that says, if this is canceled, I agree to give the money back to blank, and then whatever the agreement says. And not all states require a mutual release agreement, but you will hear this term talked about a lot. Mutual release agreements also do not guarantee what they say, okay? When you work with title companies, there is a ton of variables involved, and so I want you guys to be very clear and understand that a mutual release agreement does not remove any risk whatsoever, but it is a very nice, clear statement that can help you in the situation that there may be a problem that arises, or confusion, or any sort of argument. Next is a payoff letter. The payoff letter is a document verbalizing the amount to be funded to the lender during a double close at the end of the second transaction. it is sent to the escrow officer. Now, everybody inside of Fundwise gets our payoff letter for free that I use on all of my transactions. Basically what it says is, this is who I am, this is how much money I'm funding on the deal, and when this deal closes, this is how much money you need to get back to me. Now, when you learn the full process of a double closing, you'll see that we get the first HUD, we look at how much money we need to lend, we take that amount, we add our profit onto it, and then we send that on the payoff letter so that the title company knows how much money to put on the BC HUD for the BC transaction, like we've talked about, to get you paid back. So that's what a payoff letter does. It's just a set of instructions. It tells you how much money you're owed and also who the money is owed to. And my payoff letters always have a breakdown of who my company is and what our wire instructions are, so that it's just a nice set of instructions to send us back money when it's time. Next is a term I talk about a lot, which is white label. White labeling is a website that basically gives you credibility for submission without having to do all of the back end. So the white label that I offer to the Fundwise community that everybody gets for free inside of Fundwise Pro is a website that's professionally designed, that it looks like my website, except you get to put your own logo, your own information, and all of that on there. But when somebody submits a deal, you're not responsible for funding it, handling the contracts, handling the coordination, handling any of the risk, right? You can white label almost anything. Oftentimes it's used for something that's being resold or used in another purpose. And it basically means you take something that somebody else did and you slap your logo on it. That's what a white label is. Next term is COE. COE stands for close of escrow. Close of escrow in the sense of transactional lending is payday, right? It's the final day of the transaction when everything closes, all the documents are signed, filed, funded, and dispersed. We love close of escrow, right? But you need to understand when somebody says, when is COE, or that's the expected date for COE, or something like that. They're talking about the close of escrow, meaning the closing when all documents have been signed, all funds have been sent in, and you will not be hearing about this transaction again after today because it is closed out. Next is, of course, just breaking down the term escrow for you guys, which is a financial arrangement where a neutral third party holds funds or assets until the parties involved in a transaction fulfill their obligations. So when you send money into escrow, double closings, EMD, Morby method, whatever it is, you're sending it to a title company or an attorney, right? They're holding it in an account that is literally called the escrow account, where money is not to be sent around, used, spent, or anything like that. They have a legal obligation to fulfill, to hold that money in the account until there's direction on what to do with it next. So basically, it's like you've got your buyer and your seller, and you want all of your money in a neutral place so that everybody can trust that nobody's dipping their hand in the pot and doing all this crazy stuff and whatever, and it's staying there. And then when there is direction, right, so deal is canceled, deal gets extended, deal closes, right, whatever it may be, when there is direction to then move the money, that is when they can do it, and they can't do it until there is that clear direction. So escrow is just the place where that money is being held. Now, this is not every single possible term, but I hope that it has been a very solid, exhaustive list for you guys to get an understanding of the things that I say and maybe other people are saying in transactional lending, because when you understand what people are saying, you can then be educated and clear on what you are saying back to them. And if somebody says, can you fund a double closing? Can you handle this AB transaction? And you don't understand what they're saying, and you say something stupid, or you say something out of confusion, out of a misunderstanding, it is going to be painful. It is going to hurt your business. And so I hope that what you have heard today can help you take all of that in, understand what people are talking about, and flip that back on them so that you can actually have a full understanding. Now, if you want to see a full breakdown of the 4 different types of lending so that you can understand even more in depth and have more confidence in the transactional lending process, you can click the video that's somewhere up here and go to Transactional Lending 101 and check that out.